The neon lights of Outpost 7 cast a shimmering glow over the rain-soaked streets, reflecting off the metallic surfaces in dazzling patterns. Dominic Hayes adjusted his atmospheric scanner, eyes narrowing at the erratic readings. In the distance, the colossal tower rose, its dark, foreboding structure piercing through the stormy clouds, casting an ominous shadow against the dual sunset. Another anomaly, he muttered to himself, tapping the malfunctioning device. For 3 long months, he had tried to decode the energy signatures emanating from the tower, but they defied every known law of science. He wasn't any closer to unlocking its secrets. A sudden commotion on a nearby street pulled his attention. A group of rowdy miners had gathered, forming a circle around a lone figure. His breath caught. She was tall, with skin the color of twilight, and her tendrils, glowing faintly in the artificial light, moved with a mesmerizing fluidity. They weren't just hair. They were alive, reacting to every slight movement. "Hey, sweetheart, let's see what those things can do," one of the miners jeered, stepping closer and grabbing for one of her tendrils. The woman moved swiftly. Her tendrils lashed out like lightning, wrapping around the man's wrist and lifting him effortlessly off the ground. He yelped, eyes wide with fear. "I suggest you leave me alone." Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but it carried an edge of steel. She released him, her tendrils shifting from dark silver to a calmer, more neutral hue. The group, clearly intimidated, dragged their friend away in silence. Dominic, unable to resist, found himself moving closer. "That was impressive," he said, his voice betraying his intrigue. She turned to face him, and his heart skipped a beat. Her high cheekbones, piercing eyes, and lips that could command worlds gave her an ethereal beauty. She was otherworldly. Every feature of her seemed sculpted to perfection. "Most people run when they see what I can do," she responded, studying him with clear curiosity. "I'm not most people," Dominic said with a wry smile, extending his hand. "Dominic Hayes, xenobiologist and anomaly researcher. I'm here to study that tower." A slow smile curled on her lips. "I'm Kaida," she said, her tentacles gently curling and uncurling as if reflecting her mood. "Your instruments won't help you. The tower doesn't follow the laws of your science. Care to explain over a drink?" The bar was a typical frontier dive, packed with a mix of traders, miners, and soldiers. Dominic led Kaida to a secluded corner, noticing the wary glances from the patrons as her tendrils swayed behind her. He ordered a round of iridescent synthol. "So, what brings you here?" he asked, sliding a glass towards her. Kaida's tentacles curled thoughtfully, her gaze shifting toward the window where the tower loomed ominously in the distance. "The same thing that brings everyone here, the tower. But unlike them, I intend to reach the top." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "I've seen dozens try. None have returned. They all went alone," she said, locking eyes with him, a challenge simmering beneath her calm demeanor. "You can't reach the summit without a partner. Someone who understands the tower's secrets." He leaned forward, intrigued. "And what's at the top?" "A wish. Any wish," she whispered, her voice low. "But more importantly, my people. They're trapped within the tower, imprisoned by its guardian. I'm the last free one." Dominic's breath caught. "Your entire species? Why tell me this?" Her hand brushed his, her skin cool but electrifying to the touch. "Because you didn't run when you saw what I am, and because I've seen how you study the tower. You want to understand it, not conquer it." Before he could respond, a drunk trader from the next table stumbled into theirs, sloshing his drink over the edge of the table. "Oops," he sneered, his eyes narrowing on Kaida. "Didn't see you there, tentacle freak." Dominic stood before Kaida could react, his voice calm but firm. "Walk away. Or what? You gonna let your alien girlfriend fight for you?" the trader taunted. Dominic smiled coolly. "No, but I could tell you how the neurotoxins in her tendrils work. One touch could paralyze you for days. Want to find out firsthand?" The trader paled, muttering curses as he stumbled away. Kaida laughed softly, the sound musical and light. "You've done your homework. I like to be prepared." Later, in the privacy of a room above the bar, they continued their conversation. Kaida explained the tower's strange architecture. Each level was a challenge, designed to test both physical and mental limits. But as the night wore on, their discussion shifted, becoming more personal. Most humans are repelled by me, she admitted, her tentacles swaying gently, as if mimicking her emotions. Dominic reached out, allowing one of her tendrils to curl around his fingers. It was warm, pulsating gently with a life of its own. I find them fascinating, he whispered, marveling at how they reacted to his touch, alive with their own intelligence. Kaida smiled, moving closer. Her tentacles, now emboldened, began to explore his body with deliberate curiosity. The sensation was unlike anything Dominic had ever experienced, delicate, firm, and unexplainably intimate. He felt every emotion she communicated through them. "You enjoy this," she teased, her lips brushing his ear as her tendrils continued to explore, mapping every inch of him. He nodded, lost in the heady mix of sensations as her body pressed against his, her tentacles wrapping around him, guiding his every movement with an effortless grace. Their connection, both physical and emotional, was undeniable, growing with each passing moment. "Most would run," she whispered between kisses, her tendrils tracing the lines of his spine, his shoulders. "But not you." Dominic, his breath coming in shallow gasps, could only reply, "I'm not like the others." As they lay together, Kaida's tendrils draped over him like a living blanket, Dominic realized that this was just the beginning. Whatever the tower held, whatever dangers awaited, none of it mattered now. What mattered was the bond they had forged, a connection unlike anything he had ever known. Kaida looked at him, her tentacles gently curling around his arm, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "This is only the start. What happens next depends on us." Dominic smiled, knowing they would face whatever lay ahead together. "I'm ready." The light of dawn filtered through the thin, faded curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. Dominic stirred, feeling the warmth of Kaida's skin against his own. Her tentacles, now a soft shade of rose gold, were draped over his chest, gently coiling and uncoiling as if in a peaceful dream. He marveled at the strange beauty of it all, the way her alien form seemed to blend so seamlessly with his own. Kaida's eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep. She propped herself up on one elbow, her gaze meeting his with an intensity that sent a familiar shiver down his spine. "You're still here," she murmured, a playful smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Where else would I be?" Dominic replied, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns on her arm. The sensation of her skin under his touch was mesmerizing, like silk woven with some unknown energy. It was as if her body, like her tendrils, spoke in a language beyond words. Kaida shifted, her tentacles lazily curling around his arm, her tone growing more serious. "The tower won't wait forever. If we're going to do this, we need to go soon." Dominic nodded, the weight of her words settling in. "What exactly are we up against?" Kaida sat up, her tentacles adjusting themselves like a living crown, framing her face in a way that made her look regal, even in this worn-down room. The guardian of the tower isn't just some mindless force. It's intelligent. It tests each pair that enters in ways they can't predict. It plays on their weaknesses, their fears. And if you fail, you don't get another chance. Dominic sat up beside her, his brow furrowing. "What do we need to do differently?" Kaida's gaze was steady, her voice firm. "We need to trust each other completely. The Guardian's tests aren't just physical, they're emotional, psychological. It will try to tear us apart. If it senses even a hint of doubt, it will exploit it." Dominic swallowed, the gravity of her words sinking in. "I've seen what you can do, Kaida, and I know what I can offer. But this, it's more than just surviving, isn't it?" Kaida's tentacles shifted slightly, her expression softening. "Yes, it's about proving that our connection is stronger than anything the tower can throw at us. The Guardian feeds on isolation, on desperation. But together, we might have a chance." They spent the rest of the morning in quiet preparation. As Dominic gathered his tools and adjusted his gear, Kaida stood by the window, her tentacles swaying slightly as she stared out at the tower looming in the distance. The weight of their task hung heavy in the air, but there was an unspoken understanding between them now. This wasn't just about reaching the top. It was about something much deeper, something they hadn't fully realized until now. By midday, they were standing at the foot of the tower. Its massive entrance loomed before them, dark and forbidding. Dominic felt a chill run down his spine as the heavy stone doors slowly parted, revealing a dimly lit interior that seemed to pulse with a strange, almost sentient energy. Kaida stepped forward, her tentacles twitching slightly as if sensing the presence within. "Once we step inside, there's no turning back," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. Dominic reached out, taking her hand in his. Her skin was cool to the touch, but there was a comforting strength in her grip. "We're in this together," he said firmly. "No matter what." They entered the tower, the doors closing behind them with a heavy thud. The air inside was thick, almost oppressive, and the only light came from faint, glowing runes etched into the walls. The floor beneath their feet was smooth and cold, the silence broken only by the soft echo of their footsteps. As they ventured deeper, the walls around them seemed to shift and pulse, as if the tower itself were alive, watching their every move. Dominic felt a strange pressure building in his chest, a sense of unease that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. Kaida's tentacles tensed, her voice low. "It's starting." Without warning, the ground beneath them trembled, and the walls began to twist and warp, forming a narrow passageway that stretched out before them like a maze. The light from the runes flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. "This is one of the tower's tricks," Kaida whispered, her eyes scanning the passage. "It's trying to disorient us." Dominic frowned, his mind racing. "How do we beat it?" Kaida's tentacles curled, her expression thoughtful. "We have to stay focused on each other. The tower feeds on doubt. If we lose our connection, we'll get lost in here." Dominic nodded, his grip tightening on her hand. "I trust you." They moved cautiously through the maze, the walls shifting and changing with every step. At times, it felt as though they were walking in circles, but Kaida's tentacles seemed to guide them, sensing the right path through the labyrinth. Just as they began to see a faint light at the end of the passage, a new challenge presented itself. The walls groaned and split, revealing a figure standing in their path. A mirror image of Dominic, his eyes cold and empty. "What is this?" Dominic asked, stepping back in shock. Kaida's eyes narrowed. "It's a reflection of your doubt. It's trying to make you question yourself." The doppelganger stepped forward, his voice an eerie echo of Dominic's own. "You're not strong enough to climb this tower. You'll fail, just like all the others. She'll leave you behind." Dominic's heart pounded in his chest, but Kaida squeezed his hand, her tentacles brushing his arm, grounding him in the moment. "Don't listen to it," she whispered. "It's not real." Dominic closed his eyes, focusing on the feel of her touch, the warmth of her presence beside him. When he opened them again, the figure had disappeared, leaving only the path ahead. They continued forward, their connection unshaken, knowing that this was only the first of many tests. The tower would throw everything it had at them. Fear, doubt, even their own insecurities, but they would face it together. As they reached the first of many levels, the real challenges began. And with every step, every shared glance, Dominic knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that their bond, forged in the heart of the unknown, was stronger than anything the tower, or the universe, could throw at them. Dominic's heart pounded as he and Kaida stepped into the first level of the tower. The passage had opened up into a vast chamber, its walls towering high into shadowy obscurity. The floor was a polished stone that shimmered unnaturally, reflecting distorted versions of them as they walked. There was a feeling of intense stillness, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to make the first move. "What now?" Dominic asked, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness. Kaida's tentacles twitched slightly, an unconscious movement that Dominic had come to recognize as her way of sensing the world around her. The tower always presents a test, but it never shows its hand immediately. Her silver-blue eyes scanned the chamber, narrowing in suspicion. Stay close. This place is built to confuse us, to make us second-guess everything. No sooner had she spoken than the room seemed to react. The walls rippled, shimmering as if made of water. The ground beneath their feet began to shift, and suddenly the chamber was no longer empty. Figures emerged from the shadows, spectral forms, translucent and ethereal, their faces twisted in expressions of sorrow and pain. They moved silently, their feet not quite touching the ground, drifting closer as if pulled by some invisible force. "What the hell are those?" Dominic muttered, instinctively stepping in front of Kaida. "They're illusions," Kaida replied, her voice steady. "The tower likes to play tricks on the mind. These aren't real, but that doesn't mean they can't hurt us." The phantoms circled them, their eyes empty and hollow. One stepped forward, reaching out a hand toward Dominic, its fingers long and skeletal. He felt an icy chill radiate from its touch, and though his rational mind told him it wasn't real, his body responded in fear. Kaida's tentacles shot forward, slicing through the apparition with a swift motion. The ghostly figure disintegrated into a fine mist, but another took its place almost immediately. "We need to move," she said, her voice urgent. "The longer we stay here, the more the tower will pull at our weaknesses." Dominic nodded, his breath quickening as they pressed forward, dodging the ethereal figures that seemed to multiply with every step. The chamber stretched on endlessly, the exit nowhere in sight. The walls shifted again, warping and twisting, and for a moment, Dominic felt as though he were falling, the ground slipping away from beneath him. "I can't tell what's real," he gasped, gripping Kaida's hand tightly. "Trust me," Kaida said firmly, pulling him closer. Her tentacles wrapped around his arm, anchoring him to her. "Focus on me. The tower's trying to break your sense of reality, but as long as we stay connected, it can't." Dominic forced himself to focus on the feel of her cool skin, the gentle yet firm grip of her tentacles around his arm. Slowly, the dizzying sensation began to fade, the shifting walls stabilizing once more. But the phantoms were relentless. One of them moved in front of Kaida, its face morphing into something eerily familiar, a tall man with deep-set eyes, his expression filled with contempt. "You think you can save your people?" The figure hissed, its voice a venomous whisper. "You'll fail just like the rest. You'll be trapped here, just like them." Kaida's face remained impassive, but Dominic could see the way her tentacles tensed, the way her eyes darkened with unspoken emotion. "Ignore it," he said, stepping in front of her, his hands brushing her arm. "It's trying to get in your head." For a moment, Kaida's gaze flickered, her usual composure shaken. But then her tentacles shifted, curling protectively around Dominic's shoulders, pulling him close. "I'm fine," she murmured, her voice regaining its strength. "It's just noise." Dominic gave her a nod, his own resolve hardening. These illusions might prey on their fears and doubts, but as long as they kept their connection strong, the tower couldn't break them. The chamber's far walls suddenly began to shimmer, and a doorway materialized in the distance. "A way out." "There," Dominic said, pointing. "We got to get to that door." But the phantoms had multiplied, their translucent forms filling the room, their hollow eyes glowing with malevolent light. Dominic's muscles tensed as they moved in, surrounding them on all sides. Kaida's tentacles flared out, silver tendrils swirling with lethal grace as she slashed through the nearest figures. "Stay close," she ordered. "We'll cut our way through." They moved together in sync, Dominic staying close behind her as Kaida's tentacles cleared a path. The phantoms hissed and shrieked as they were torn apart, but there were always more to take their place. The air grew thick with tension, the oppressive energy of the tower pressing down on them. With every step they took, the door grew closer. But so did the feeling of being watched, of something far more dangerous lurking just beyond their sight. As they neared the exit, the ground beneath them trembled, and a new figure emerged from the shadows. This one far more solid, far more menacing than the others. It was humanoid, but twisted and grotesque. Its body a mass of writhing tentacles and sinewy muscle. Its eyes burned with a fiery intensity, and it moved with a predatory grace. "That's no illusion," Dominic muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for the small energy blade at his side. Kaida's tentacles bristled, her expression hardening. "The Guardian's test." The creature roared, a deafening sound that shook the chamber. It charged at them with terrifying speed, its tentacles lashing out like whips. Dominic barely had time to react before Kaida was in motion, her own tentacles moving to intercept the creature's attack. They clashed in a blur of motion, Kaida's tentacles snapping against the Guardian's with a sharp, metallic sound. For a moment, it seemed like she had the upper hand, but the Guardian was stronger, more relentless. It pushed her back, its monstrous form towering over them. "Dominic!" Kaida shouted, her voice strained as she struggled to hold the creature at bay. Without thinking, Dominic surged forward, his energy blade igniting with a brilliant blue glow. He slashed at the creature's tentacles, aiming for the gaps in its twisted armor. The blade cut through, severing one of the Guardian's limbs, but it barely seemed to slow the creature down. It reared back, its remaining tentacles whipping toward Dominic with brutal force. He barely dodged in time, the sharp tendrils slicing through the air where he had been moments before. "Get to the door!" Kaida yelled, her voice desperate. But Dominic didn't move. He couldn't leave her. Not now. With a roar of defiance, he lunged at the creature again, his blade cutting through another tentacle. Kaida seized the opening, her own tendrils wrapping around the Guardian's neck, pulling it down with a powerful, crushing force. The creature let out one final, earth-shaking cry before crumbling to the ground in a heap of twisted limbs. Panting, Dominic stared down at the fallen Guardian, his heart racing. The door to the next level stood open before them, but there was no time to celebrate. They both knew this was only the beginning. Kaida straightened, her tentacles still twitching from the fight, her eyes meeting his with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We keep moving," she said quietly. Dominic nodded, his resolve firm. Together, they stepped through the door, ready for whatever the tower would throw at them next. As Dominic and Kaida entered the second level of the tower, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air was thick with an oppressive humidity, and the dim light cast eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe on the walls. The once polished stone floor was now slick with a viscous substance, reflecting the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi that clung to the damp walls like luminous vines. "This place feels different," Dominic murmured, wiping his brow. The tension from their previous encounter still lingered in the air, tightening the knot in his stomach. Kaida's tentacles flickered with agitation. Every level has its own personality, its own challenges. This one is designed to prey on fear. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she scanned their surroundings. "Stay alert." As they ventured deeper into the chamber, the shadows began to coalesce into shapes, forming figures that loomed ominously in the corners. Dominic's pulse quickened as he recognized the fleeting forms of people, friends, family, faces from his past, all twisted in expressions of disappointment and betrayal. Each one seemed to whisper his name, their voices a haunting chorus that echoed in his mind. "Dom," one of the figures murmured, a young girl with wide, sorrowful eyes. "Why did you leave us?" Dominic shook his head, forcing himself to focus. "They're not real," he said, clenching his fists. "They're just illusions." But the guilt that gnawed at him felt very real. Kaida stepped closer, her tentacles brushing against him, grounding him in the moment. "Don't let them in. Remember what we've faced together. Focus on our mission." With her words echoing in his mind, he pushed through the waves of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. They continued forward, each step accompanied by the haunting whispers that slithered through the air, probing at his vulnerabilities. But the illusions weren't finished. The figures morphed into darker shapes, their features growing more grotesque, embodying his deepest fears. One became a monstrous version of himself, distorted and twisted, its mouth stretching into a terrifying grin. "Look at you," the apparition sneered, its voice dripping with disdain. A failure, a coward. You've never been good enough. Just run away again. Like you always do. Dominic felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. I'm not afraid of you, he shouted defiantly, but the words felt hollow against the weight of his self-doubt. Kaida's voice cut through the fog of despair. Dominic, focus on me. Her tentacles tightened around his arm, a lifeline in the chaos. Remember who you are. You're not alone. He turned to her, finding strength in her unwavering gaze. You're right, he said, his voice steadier. I've got to keep moving forward. Just then, the chamber shifted, walls warping and twisting as if responding to his resolve. The shadows began to recede, the figures dissolving into mist. Dominic took a deep breath, relief washing over him, but he knew this level wasn't finished with them yet. The floor began to tremble beneath their feet, and a loud crack echoed through the chamber. A chasm opened up in front of them, yawning wide and dark, a gaping maw that seemed to pulse with an unearthly energy. Kaida! Dominic shouted as the ground shook, forcing him to grab onto a nearby ledge. What do we do? We can't go back. Kaida replied, her voice urgent. We need to find a way across. There must be something. He looked around desperately, spotting a series of uneven rock formations jutting out from the chasm. They weren't far apart, but the darkness below them seemed to stretch infinitely, swallowing any light that dared to venture near. Let's jump, Dominic suggested, his heart racing. Kaida nodded, her tentacles curling tightly around him once more. On 3. 1, 2. They leapt together, Dominic's heart in his throat as they sailed through the air. He landed awkwardly on the first rock, his foot slipping on the slick surface, but he managed to regain his balance. Kaida landed gracefully beside him, her tentacles helping to stabilize him. Keep moving, she urged, and they sprang to the next rock, then the next. Each jump felt more precarious than the last, and with every leap, the chasm below seemed to groan in hunger. Just as they reached the final rock, the ground shook violently again, sending them stumbling. The rock beneath their feet cracked, and Dominic felt his heart race as he lost his footing. He began to slip toward the edge. Dom! Kaida cried, lunging forward to grab his arm with one of her tentacles. He felt her grip tighten around him as she pulled him back from the brink. I've got you, she shouted, her eyes fierce with determination. Thanks, Dominic gasped, his heart pounding. Let's get out of here. They scrambled up the last ledge, the rocky surface finally leading them to a solid pathway. The chasm behind them began to seal itself, shadows swirling as if the tower were reclaiming its depths. As they paused to catch their breath, Dominic looked at Kaida, his chest heaving. You saved me. Again, Kaida smiled softly, her tentacles curling around him in a comforting embrace. We save each other. That's how it works. But their moment of respite was short-lived. A low rumble echoed from ahead, and the pathway widened into a vast cavern. In the center, a glowing orb pulsed with light, surrounded by swirling shadows that danced in a chaotic rhythm. That's something, Dominic said, awestruck by the sight. Kaida's tentacles flared, a mix of wonder and caution. It feels powerful, but we need to be careful. The tower will try to use it against us. Dominic nodded, stepping cautiously toward the orb. As he approached, the shadows coalesced into forms once more, but this time they were different. Instead of faces from his past, they morphed into nightmarish creatures, beasts with jagged teeth and glowing eyes that seemed to pulse with darkness. Prepare yourself, Kaida warned, her tentacles ready for battle. They're coming. Dominic steadied himself, gripping his energy blade tightly. The shadows lunged forward, fierce and relentless, eager to consume them. They clashed against the light of the orb, which flickered as if resonating with their fear. As the creatures surged, Dominic and Kaida fought back-to-back, their movements a synchronized dance of survival. He slashed at the nearest shadow beast, feeling a surge of energy with each strike, but there were too many. More continued to emerge from the depths of the cavern, their numbers overwhelming. Stay focused, Kaida shouted, her tentacles striking with lethal precision. We have to reach the orb. Dominic nodded, determination igniting within him. On three, we break through. Together, Kaida affirmed. With a powerful roar, they charged forward, their combined strength pushing against the tide of darkness. As they reached the orb, its light surged, illuminating the cavern in a brilliant glow. The shadow beasts recoiled, their forms wavering under the radiant energy. Dominic reached out, placing his hand on the orb's surface. A rush of warmth surged through him, filling him with clarity and strength. It's alive, he breathed, feeling the power pulsing beneath his palm. Kaida joined him, her tentacles brushing against the orb. We can use its energy to fight them, she said, her voice steady. But we have to focus together. Let's do it, Dominic shouted. As they joined their energies, a wave of brilliant light erupted from the orb, sweeping through the cavern. The shadow beasts shrieked, their forms dissolving into nothingness as the light washed over them. The cavern filled with a blinding radiance, and Dominic felt an overwhelming sense of connection between him and Kaida, between them and the orb. This was the true essence of their journey, not just surviving the tower, but understanding their bond and the strength it provided. With a final surge, the light exploded outward, banishing the shadows completely. The cavern fell silent, and as the radiance faded, Dominic and Kaida stood alone, the orb now a glowing, pulsing heart in the center of the chamber. Breathless, Dominic turned to Kaida, a grin breaking across his face. We did it, Kaida smiled back, her eyes sparkling with pride. We did, but we need to keep moving. This was just a taste of what's to come. Together, they stepped away from the orb, ready to face whatever challenges the tower had yet to throw at them. Their bond had been tested, and they had emerged stronger. Whatever lay ahead, they would confront it side by side, united in purpose and unwavering in their resolve. Dominic and Kaida stood at the threshold of the next level, the atmosphere shifting once more as they stepped into a vast chamber illuminated by an otherworldly glow. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to pulsate with energy, depicting scenes of battles and ancient rituals, telling the story of the tower and its many conquerors. This level feels different, Kaida said, her tentacles flickering with curiosity as they moved deeper into the space. It's almost like the tower is trying to communicate with us. Dominic nodded, taking in the vibrant murals. There's history here, he mused. It feels like we're in the heart of something significant. He stepped closer to the carvings, tracing his fingers over the engravings. Look at this. It's almost like a map. Kaida joined him, her eyes scanning the carvings. These depict challenges faced by those who have come before us, she observed. Each symbol represents a trial. If we're going to move forward, we need to understand what they mean. As they examined the intricate designs, a low rumble reverberated through the chamber, causing the ground to tremble beneath their feet. Suddenly, a colossal door at the far end of the room began to rise, revealing a passageway shrouded in darkness. Looks like we don't have a choice, Dominic said, steeling himself. We have to enter that passage. Kaida's tentacles tightened around his arm. Together, then, she said, her tone firm. Whatever lies ahead, we face it as one. With a shared glance of determination, they stepped into the darkness. As they traversed the passage, the air became heavy with an electric tension, thick enough to make Dominic's skin prickle. The faint glow from behind them faded, leaving them in near-complete darkness, relying on the instinctual guidance of Kaida's bioluminescent tendrils. Suddenly, the corridor opened into another chamber, larger than the last. The air was cool and still, and at its center stood a raised platform surrounded by an array of strange, pulsing crystals that shimmered like stars against the blackened stone. Each crystal emitted a soft hum, resonating in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Dominic approached the platform cautiously, eyes wide with wonder. "What are these?" he asked, reaching out to touch one of the crystals. As his fingers brushed its surface, the hum intensified, sending a wave of energy coursing through him. Visions flashed before his eyes, images of the tower's past, of climbers ascending, battling their fears and failures, each striving for a singular goal. They are conduits, Kaida explained, her voice barely a whisper. They harness the energy of the tower. It looks like we need to interact with them to proceed. Dominic felt the pull of the crystals, each one calling to him with a unique frequency. But how? He wondered aloud. What do we do? Kaida stepped closer to one of the larger crystals, studying its intricate patterns. I think we need to align our energies with them, she suggested. It's like a dance, finding the right rhythm. All right, Dominic agreed, stepping beside her. Let's give it a try. They stood before the crystal, hands outstretched. As they focused, Dominic felt a connection building between them and the crystal. The hum transformed into a harmonious melody, resonating deep within him. He could feel Kaida's presence beside him, her energy intertwining with his, creating a bond that felt more powerful than anything he had ever experienced. As they concentrated, the crystal began to glow brighter, pulsing with an energy that surged through their bodies. Dominic's mind expanded, flooded with knowledge and understanding. They were no longer just individuals. They were part of something greater, connected to the tower and its history. The melodies of the other crystals joined the chorus, each one resonating with a different frequency, and soon they were enveloped in a symphony of sound. The ground shook, and the air crackled with energy as the platform beneath them rose, lifting them into the air. "Hold on!" Kaida shouted, her tentacles instinctively wrapping around Dominic, anchoring him as they soared upward. The platform ascended rapidly, leaving the chamber below far behind, until they burst through a shimmering veil of light, emerging into a new realm. They found themselves standing atop a cliff overlooking an expansive landscape, bathed in vibrant hues of purple and blue. The sky above was adorned with multiple moons, casting an ethereal glow over the terrain. In the distance, they could see swirling storms, flashes of lightning illuminating the horizon. "Is this another level?" Dominic asked, awestruck by the beauty surrounding them. "I think it is," Kaida replied, her eyes sparkling with wonder. "But it feels different, more alive." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet again, and a deep rumble echoed from the distance. A massive figure emerged from the swirling storms, a colossal guardian, a creature of shadow and lightning, towering over the cliffs. Its eyes glowed fiercely, piercing the mist with an intensity that sent a chill down Dominic's spine. "This must be the guardian of the tower," Kaida breathed, her voice filled with trepidation. "It's testing us." The guardian's voice resonated like thunder, vibrating through the air. "Who dares to ascend the Tower of Trials? Prove your worth, or be cast into the abyss." Dominic felt his heart race as he stepped forward, instinctively positioning himself protectively in front of Kaida. "We are here to face the trials," he declared, trying to project confidence despite the fear gnawing at him. "We seek to uncover the truth and save Kaida's people." The Guardian regarded them with an expression that seemed to convey both curiosity and challenge. "To proceed, you must conquer the fears that bind you. Only through facing your true selves can you earn passage." As the words settled in the air, Dominic's mind flashed with the memories of his past, the moments of doubt, of running away, of letting people down. Kaida's own struggles echoed in his thoughts, her journey of solitude, the weight of her people's expectations. "Together, we can overcome anything," Kaida whispered, her tentacles gently intertwining with his. "We have already faced so much. We can face this." Dominic nodded, a newfound determination surging within him. "Let's do this, Kaida. We'll show the Guardian our strength." With their hearts aligned, they stepped toward the edge of the cliff, preparing to confront the trials that lay ahead. The Guardian raised its arms, summoning swirling clouds of energy that coalesced into images of their deepest fears, visions of failure, of loss, of doubt. "Face your shadows," the Guardian commanded. "Only then will you earn your place among the worthy." As the shadows enveloped them, Dominic and Kaida braced themselves. They would face whatever came, together, for the strength of their bond would guide them through the darkness. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for each other, for their dreams, and for the future they wished to create. In that moment, they understood the power of their connection and the journey ahead. No matter the trials, they would emerge stronger, ready to confront whatever the tower demanded of them. Together, they would find a way to overcome the shadows, lighting the path toward hope and freedom.